3. Good evening and welcome to this virtual meeting of Overview and Scrutiny Management. I have apologies for absence for Mark Brain and potentially from Lucy Whittle as well. Can I just check we have no others? Apologies? No? Oh, okay, thank you. Members, do we have any declarations of interest to declare? No? Okay, minutes of the previous meeting, pages 7 to 12 have been circulated. Is everybody happy that I virtually sign those as a correct record? Yep, thank you. Item 5 is Chair's business. I'm not going to welcome everybody by name to the meeting, but can I just welcome the representatives of the companies and also I see Helen representing the Cabinet. So welcome to all of you and to Mike Jackson. I wanted to set the scene for the meeting if I could. Our main aim is to consider the business plans for Bristol Holdings, Bristol Waste and Gorham Homes. Now, as members know, inevitably some of that information is confidential. I hope that we can keep as much of the meeting as possible public. So I'm asking members to consider that when framing your questions and comments, you do bear that in mind. And just to be clear, that's not an attempt to stop you from asking confidential questions, because if you need to ask them, then of course you can. But it is a plea to keep the meeting open for as long as possible. If you want to ask confidential questions, let me know, and we will take them in exempt session. If you don't realise you've asked an exempt question, Nancy is here with us, and I've already indicated to her that she can interrupt at any appropriate time, as clearly the last thing we want to do is to breach any confidentiality. Now, at this point, I'm just going to make a plea for sympathy on my part, at least, in that I've just spent 3 hours at Audit Committee. That was a meeting also discussing the Council's companies and in particular the Grant Thornton governance report on their business plans in the past and how those were presented to Cabinet. I wanted to circulate a link to that paper to this meeting, but was advised that I should not. Can I just urge members to look at the review of governance arrangements in today's audit papers? I think it's really important that members do understand that. In particular, it states that the Cabinet did not make fully informed decisions and that the Audit Committee was not cited on the risks. And I really do think it's important that members do understand that. But I must also make clear this is not an item specifically for discussion today. I can see Anthony wants to speak, and I'll come back to you in a moment, Anthony. What I wanted to do now, if I may, is just go through, I propose as an outline today. So Peter Bianchi is going to introduce each business plan. So he's going to speak very briefly on the Holdings business plan. We will then discuss that plan. Then we will go in turn to each of the companies. I would look to be able to spend up to an hour on Bristol Waste and then 30 minutes on Gorham. So that's how I plan to take it, but it depends on the demand from members. We want to make sure that we have a reasonable discussion, but if it gets repetitive, I may decide to move on to the next item. So that's briefly how I choose to play it. Anthony, you had your hand raised.
Thank you, Jeff. Well, it is the elephant in the room. There are a number of things that we've been promised that we would have sight of here. For example, we were going to have a discussion about the beacon. We were going to have a discussion about the clean air zone. Clean air zone is out there in public, and it's not been brought to this scrutiny committee in a timely fashion as we asked for it. And the same is going to occur if we're not careful with this report from Grant Thornton and the Bristol Energy Company. Now, there are a lot of people in the room, and I don't think I actually know a lot of them, so I'm very nervous about upsetting anybody, and I really don't want this to be personal, but the fact is Grant Thornton have made 12 extremely valid points. And one of those points is the way that we, as the, if I may say, the senior scrutiny committee and audit, who are also charged with a specific task, are only allowed to see certain bits of this puzzle. And as Jeff just explained, certainly not, we're not all allowed to see all of it all at the same time. And I think that's wrong. And I think if we don't confront this and really get to grips with this, these problems will keep occurring in the future. Now, I believe there's been legal advice about the separation of the two organizations, but I do believe there should be a meeting, and I'm hoping that the members here are going to agree to this. I do think there should be a meeting of this committee and of the audit committee. I think that meeting should include Tim O'Gara and Denise Murray. And I think we should talk out what's being said in the Grant Thornton report and the other items of which we are only too aware, where we have been ignored when we've made recommendations, where we have tried to ask for information that we've not been allowed to see, when we've been given outdated information and then completely ignored, when in spite of all that, we still made the right recommendation. Something is wrong here, and it'll keep being wrong. It won't get any better until we confront it. So I'm asking, please, members, that we face up to this, do our job, do our duty, frankly, old-fashioned word, do our duty, get this right, and make sure we iron out these wrinkles in the way this council operates, so we can make sure we don't have any more problems down the road, because we've got City Leap coming forward. That's in embryo. We have to get these things right, and they're not right now, and they won't get right unless we face them and talk them through. And I'll listen to, frankly. So Jeff, as chair, may I please ask you to take that as a formal request, a formal recommendation, that we set up such a meeting, and frankly, as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. I hear exactly what you say. I'm very sympathetic to that, but I think we need to have discussions with Denise and Tim on how we move that forward. Can I suggest that I have those discussions, and I will bring something to the OSM Leeds meeting, and we can report back at our next OSM meeting, which is coming up relatively soon. Would members be happy that we go down that route? I'm reluctant to make a commitment to go one way or another at this stage until we've had those discussions. Paula.
Well, I'd just like to say very briefly two things. One is, having read the recommendations,
Paula,
I did think that there is time
we
to
can't
perhaps
hear
have
you.
a review of governance. Can you hear me?
Paula, you're echoing. I can't hear a word, and I'm not sure anyone else can.
I'm not muted.
Yeah, it's echoing.
Okay, I'll come back on another thing.
Paula, log out and come back in again. We can hear you, but
can you hear me better now without the headphones?
Not really.
No.
Councillor, if you turn your video off.
I'm going to have to come in on another machine. I'll make the point afterwards. Apologies.
Right. Well, I think we'll have to carry on, because I don't know whether anyone else picked up anything that Paula was saying, but I couldn't. Anthony, are you happy if we proceed as I've outlined to try and resolve with Denise and Tim how we move forward? You're muted, Anthony.
Sorry, Chair, I was going to say that I'd rather do it my way, but if yours is the only one that's on the table, I'll go with it.
Okay, thank you, Anthony. In which case we now move on. Item 7, COVID-19 update for information. I think all we can say, as we do each time this comes up, is Mike, can you continue to relay to all council officers what a fantastic job they're doing in the most difficult of circumstances? And I think that's probably as much as we can add at this time, unless anyone else has anything significant they wish to say. No? Okay, thank you. So we then move on to item 8, which is the Bristol Holdings Group business plans. And that's obviously the main reason why we are here.
Councillor Gollop,
So
do you want to take public forum at this point, or do you want to take it separately?
You're right, I do. Where's public forum gone on my, I've missed it on my agenda. Thank you so much. My apologies. Yes, public forum. We have one question and one statement. Is Suzanne Audrey with us?
She is, Chair, just joining. Just connecting to audio, I think.
Okay.
Should be with you now, Chair, I think.
Oh.
I'm here, but I don't. You might be pleased that you can't see me, and I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, no, you were at the bottom of my second screen when I hadn't realised I'd gone onto a second screen. So my apologies for that. I now have a screen with your name on, Suzanne.
Right. I think that might be as much as you get.
Yep. We have your question, and we have the answer that's been given, although I'm not quite sure who's given the answer, but you are allowed to ask a supplementary, and then we'll see where that takes us. So Suzanne, over to you.
No, this is terrible.
Have you had the answer, Suzanne?
Yes, something's going horribly wrong though, isn't it? Okay, is everything calmed down now? Yeah, I don't know what's happening.
There's nothing happening here. We're waiting for your supplementary, so I'm not quite sure.
Okay, well the thing is, I've had a response. To be honest, I don't absolutely understand it, but so I would welcome the chair to tell me whether that's a. Is that a good response that I've received? I don't understand. No, this is not good.
Can I just ask who provided the response in the first place? Lucy, do we know?
I believe it was the shareholder liaison manager, Chair.
Oh, Claire, are you able to enlighten us?
Yes, we
not really, because I'm just trying to look at both screens at the same time.
Oh, sorry, not you. Claire, sorry, wrong Claire. It's Claire Jeffets
Sorry.
Who's in that role. Claire, are you able?
Apologies. Yeah, so the response was drafted based on considering the question which touched on a number of the GT recommendations in their report. And in response, we summarised our plan as a management team to pick up on the various GT recommendations relevant to that question, and particularly the publication of reserve matter decisions to improve the transparency around those decisions.
Okay, I'm hoping that it seems to add at least a bit more opportunity for you. I mean, my concern is whether Scrutiny is actually getting enough information. I think you all know that because I ask these questions in various forms. So, and I do want to say that I think you all do a fantastic job. I had no idea before I started watching councillors at work just how much work you all do. So congratulations to the councillors as well as the officers. But so now I now see, I'm worried about all the businesses and whether they are being scrutinised, because an awful lot of our public money is going into those. So I guess my supplementary is I now see that Bristol Waste, there's an exempt item. I'm not suggesting I should know what's going on there, but I would just like some reassurance really that everything's in place, that, you know, when you go into exempt, that you all feel that you know what you're doing and you're looking after our money.
Thank you, Suzanne, and thank you for the questions you're asking. The issue that came up at Audit Committee this afternoon and that we discuss every time is that we can only scrutinise or review what we know about, and that continues to be a problem because we don't know what it is we don't know, and that is the issue that we have to resolve. However, I think the answer you've got to your initial question indicates that the council notes there was a problem with those reserve decisions and is trying to find a way of resolving it. So I think that's something that we will have to monitor, and I'm sure you will monitor for us as well to ensure that that it's actually getting better. I think that's probably as far as we can say on that particular issue.
Okay, but thank you very much, all of you. And I'm sorry for the slightly chaotic entry into the meeting. It's wasn't ideal, but I'll watch the rest of the meeting, see how you all get on. And thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne. That's appreciated. Thank you. David Redgewell, we have a statement from you.
Thank you very much, Jeff. The reason, obviously, I want to speak to the committee rather than just growth and regeneration is that obviously the importance of having a strong sub-regional government for the point of view of planning and transport is absolutely unanimously agreed amongst the transport and planning stakeholder groups, of which, you know, FOSBRO and TFGB and the BAF Tram Group and others, and the transport unions. So therefore, we would welcome the work that the Growth and Regeneration Subcommittee did on WECA and North Somerset's enlargement. But we have a WECA meeting on Wednesday of the Scrutiny Commission. The Mayor made it quite clear that the Scrutiny Commission, and I agree with him, by the way, that the Scrutiny Commission is very important at WECA to make sure that we pick up the issues around governance, policies and the boards and how they function, delivery, and then how we go forward with the devolution deal and North Somerset Council. It was very enlightening to hear a different view from Tim Borrett to what I've heard from constantly from legal officers at WECA, that we can actually go forward with North Somerset joining in between elections. I've also had that view now from South Gloucestershire Scrutiny Commission, who've also written to Luke Hall about the issue. So it's such an important issue because riding on it is the mass transit proposals for the West of England Combined Authority Bristol Travel to Work area. Also the growth and regeneration of areas around Temple Meads, and improving the North Somerset Council's transportation network and regeneration, and particularly if we want new homes, as the Mayor and the Council does, to be built in North Somerset and around Whitchurch in Baines and around parts of South Gloucestershire. Bristol's only a very small city of 480,000 people. The city region's much bigger and the suburbs lie in other authorities. So we need to actually grab this one. And the reason to speak tonight is to make sure on Wednesday, the Bristol members of the Scrutiny Commission at WECA do start to drill down into some of these policies very clearly and get background papers in the way Andrew just saying about this Scrutiny Commission, making sure we understand what WECA is about and how we take this matter forward. So that was my main reason to speak to you tonight. I did also want to raise a couple of COVID issues, Jeff. First of all, can we please make sure, and you'll hear me say this, budget scrutiny, can we make sure there's a budget for toilets so we don't go for emergency budgets to find toilets in Queen Square and in the harbour and if we have the city centre reopened, but with no hospitality, which is quite possible for a few months, and people can actually use those conveniences because of the need for people, hands, face, space, etc. And the other issue is I'm agreeing tonight asking again for COVID marshals and police officers to travel the bus and transport network. I am horrified to see we had a nurse spat at on a bus service by a, I don't know what I would describe the 20-year-old, he's not been caught, a 21-year-old who had a scooter on a bus and assaulted a nurse at a dental hospital. She's okay, but she had to have a complete change of uniform. And so it's very, very important that we do see marshals on the public transport network and we see police officers on the network. And I think finally, I'd like to say, it's not clear, Jeff, whether I live in Westbury-on-Trym or whether I live in Cribbs Causeway or whether I live in Bath. The mayor, the Metro Mayor, has produced a rapid transit system, which I welcome very much for the city, but I don't understand the roots of it. And I'm not sure that there's much public consultation other than a few press releases. So if you could ask the WECA officers who want for light rail and rapid transit to talk to the community and talk to the stakeholders, I think we gratefully receive that. I'd just like to put my thanks to Peter Mann and the WECA team for all the work they're doing on buses at the moment and making sure with James Freeman and Rupert Cox that we're able to reach vaccination centres. There's an awful lot of work at bus services to vaccination centres across the Bristol Bath City region, which has got to be congratulated. Although I still maintain I would like to see screens to protect drivers on HCT buses. We've got drivers with COVID and those buses are running to and from Southmead Hospital without screens. And I find that very unacceptable from a point of view of the bus drivers union. I just asked to pass that on tonight to you. But thanks for your help. And I would be grateful if we can really make some progress, and perhaps again we can get Luke Hall to speak to this committee, to speak to Scrutiny at WECA about how we take forward, he's a local MP, how we take forward.
Come to a conclusion, please, David.
Yeah, finally, how we take North Somerset into WECA. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David, for that all-encompassing public forum statement. I'm sure there's someone in the council it doesn't apply to, but I think for now the scrutiny members can note it, and perhaps Craig, if we can pass it to you for noting from the point of view of Cabinet, that would be appreciated. Right, thank you, David. We appreciate your time and your contribution as ever. So hopefully I'm now in the right place on the agenda to move on to the substantive item. I'm just checking with Lucy that I'm there. Yep. Good.
Yes, Councillor Sargent's had a hand raised though, Chair.
Yep, Joe.
Yeah, it's just regarding the issue around when public forum happens and when a written answer is sent out and we have no idea who's provided that answer. I think it should be expected that every answer to a public forum question is identified as to where it's come from. Where, you know, I'm not necessarily expecting an individual officer to be named, but at least the team from where it comes, especially when it's sort of a multifaceted question. It's not always clear. So I just thought it was worth mentioning, sort of minuting that I think that should be the norm.
Joe, thank you. As ever, your point's totally spot on. Lucy, can I just check? Do members agree that that should be the case? I'm sure you do. Yeah. Lucy, can we make that a point of principle for all scrutiny meetings in future? Because there really should be an indication of where an answer's come from.
Yes, of course, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay,
Thank you. Thank you, Joe. So we do move on to the substantive item, which is the business plans. And first of all, we are going to deal with Bristol Holdings, and we have leading on that Peter Biange. But I should just, before I do that, say that Companies House very kindly write to me from time to time, and earlier this week they wrote to me to say that Chris Holm is now a director of BE 2020. I'm not sure whether that's something that I would necessarily offer congratulations for, Chris, but it does mean we know where to come with the questions because you're here with us and we can tackle you on those. So,
I'm happy to answer when I can, Chair.
Sorry?
Happy to answer when I can, Chair. That's...
Indeed. So I'm going to hand over to Peter, and he'll deal with Bristol Holdings and then introduce the other directors with us as we do the other companies. So, Peter, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, councillors. It's a delight to be back. And Councillor Gollop's already introduced Chris Holm, who, of course, is our holding group FD. And Chris and I will be happy to take questions in about 5 minutes, if I may, on the Bristol Holding business plan, which I hope you've all had a chance to read. We were here in front of you a year ago talking about what we aim to do over the next 12 months. And like all of the businesses, we made really good inroads into a lot of our objectives. But I think it's fair to say that we had massive impacts by several events over the last 12 months. I'm not going to run the COVID message again. That's affected everybody, and it's front and centre. But I think that what councillors do need to understand is that the holding company resource you are looking at in terms of the executive, Chris is full-time, I'm part-time, and we spent a considerable amount of time in the last year supporting councillors and officers on the Bristol energy issues, all of which I'm sure you're all up to speed, including taking it to market in 5 working days in terms of securing assistance from consultancy, getting it to Cabinet in June, and the sale in September. And I'll talk about what we're doing this year in a moment. In addition to that, we were also parachuted in to assist in several other ways commercially to support officers and various groups on numerous challenges throughout the year, most of which were unplanned. But despite that, we still made good progress on a lot of our objectives, which was about the transition year, as it was called last year, for the holding company. If you recall, we'd been in post 2 months, I think, when we first stood in front of you at Osm. Remember those days when we were allowed to stand together and sit together in City Hall. And we've made good progress on a lot of activities around the transition phase of the holding company. This year, the business plan in front of you, 21-22, is all about consolidation of what we started doing, and it's about growth across the group. Growth in terms of holding company, but more importantly, growth in terms of Gorham, Bristol Waste, and our newest company, Bristol Heat Networks, which we're not presenting today, which will come back in the future. In terms of consolidation, the main focus, as we've outlined in our business plan, would be to support officers in the shareholder governance review that's ongoing. It will be to develop the work that we've already started, the good progress we've made around the risk management framework, which is coming along really well. And importantly, and Councillor Gollop just mentioned it, to make sure that we keep very close to the final elements of the BE 2020 sale and the eventual liquidation of the company. And part of that plan, as you've just heard, is to transition Holdco members across as directors on BE 2020 to provide continuity and to transition as the board, the BE 2020 board, goes in due course. In terms of growth, as I've covered in the business plan, obviously the growth is in our subsidiaries, so we'll be working very closely with colleagues on the call this evening from Gorham, from Bristol Waste, and we're also be aiming to grow the Bristol Heat Network business, which we're just in the process of standing up and getting established. We make no apologies, as we did last year in the business plan, for highlighting this is what we can do for the business plan. Here is what we'd like the shareholder to consider doing. and things like engaging Bristol Holding in conversations about potential commercialisation opportunities the council may or may not consider in the future. This is really important for the council, we would argue, in terms of our commercial background and assistance around alternative delivery models. And it's really important, as you'll read in the business plan, for us to have future business, more business coming into the group, because as I think you'll understand, as Bristol Energy departs, and in fact next year Bristol Heat Networks is planned to depart City Leap, we must find somewhere to place our management charges. And Bristol Energy carried a lot of that charge in previous years. So it's really important for the sustainability of the holding group model that we're able to apply our charges across the subsidiaries, obviously not back to the council. And that leads me nicely onto my last part, really, is around the risk. It's really important. What you've got in the business plan is a snapshot in time. The development of that business plan was around October time. Things are moving all the time in terms of risk. The risks at the moment that we're facing is around the loss of income, as I've just mentioned, from one of our major subsidiaries moving from the group. That will come to conclusion, as I say, in this financial year. And next year, we're planning to lose Bristol Heat Networks. That will increase the pressure on us to find alternative route for our management fees. We have developed ideas around some efficiencies and alternative operating models, and we're in discussion with the shareholder on those, which we hope will help to reduce costs across the group and improve efficiencies and effectiveness. And finally, probably one of the biggest risks we've got on our risk register at the moment is the impact of the BE, the Bristol Energy story. This is in terms of confidence in the holding group operating model, a natural expectation that there's going to be far more scrutiny, oversight from the council officers and councillors in everything that we're doing. That's going to increase, obviously, and dominate perhaps at times in other regards. And we hope it shouldn't slow down too much decision making, but it's bound to have an impact. And of course, where we're sat in Bristol Holding, working with our subsidiaries in a commercial market, being able to make decisions quickly and move forward is really, really important for each of the businesses. That's all I'm going to say by way of introduction. It is, of course, our business plan. So at this point, I will switch hats, and Chris and I will step up virtually, and we'll be glad to take any questions.
Thank you, Peter. I'm just having a look, because otherwise, anybody else got questions? Because I can come in with mine quite easily. Anthony, and then Joe.
I thought there would be a very long stream of people asking questions. Thank you for that introduction. I note that you say in your report, I've got 2 or 3 points here, if I may. I note that you say in your report that you're very pleased with the good work achieved during this last year, but you define that work, the core role, as being scrutiny, assurance, and operational oversight. Would you think this has been such a good year for those 3 parts of your role?
Well, I'd actually perhaps turn that question around and ask the shareholder representative and officers, maybe the chief executive, to give you a view on that, rather than us perhaps answering how well we've done. We've stated what we consider to be our value to the shareholder and the council in our business plan. So we've probably got nothing to add to that. I'd probably turn it over to maybe the chief exec and the shareholder group.
The question was directed at you, though, because it's your report.
Yes, I believe we have done a good job in supporting the shareholder group and council in oversight, working with our subsidiaries, a very challenging time, and in particular, the work that we've been doing with the council in regards to the Bristol Energy decisions and eventual sale.
Okay, I think as an outsider and as a member of OSM, I certainly feel an outsider in this situation, and certainly the public would feel even more outside all this, is that we struggle to see your role between the administration and, if you like, the commercial companies. You were talking about the costs of the holding company in terms of your management costs. I mean, surely they're going to be spread over the number of companies. It's not a fixed cost, which is spread over. I mean, there are going to be some fixed costs, but it's going to be spread over surely the amount of work that you do across a number of companies. So that will surely solve itself, or be eased. But if you're looking to make changes, which you say in your own report before the Grant Thornton report was fully taken on board, when do you see the timescale for those governance changes as far as the holding company is concerned?
Thank you, Councillor. A couple of really good questions there. I think the first one, we'd have real sympathy with your view, actually, in terms of struggling to understand our role and where we fit. This is something we have recognised and we're discussing on the board, how we can improve that. Because I think unless you are in the thick of it and in the middle and intimately involved on a day-to-day basis, it probably is quite challenging to understand the holding company role. And I think that's something that we've certainly got in our plans this year to try and improve, particularly, most importantly, across the councillors and officers, but obviously with the public as well. So I think that's a fair comment that you've raised. It's something we do recognise, and I think it's something in our second year that we need to do more on to be clear what our role is and how we fit in the jigsaw, as I think you said earlier on.
Well, I'm very heartened that you appreciate that this is a problem for you, because it certainly is for people looking from the outside. So that's a very good start.
Yeah, no, I think it's very, very common. It's something we have discussed at the board. In terms of your second comment in terms of the costs and timescales. So just for people who perhaps who are looking in who don't understand, we do recover our costs through our subsidiaries. As that group of subsidiaries gets smaller, for example, as the Bristol Energy business moves from the group, we have to apply those charges elsewhere. In the coming financial year 21-22, we're able to share those charges out amongst the remaining companies, but for 22-23 onwards, it will become a challenge. So we have set out some ideas and options for the council. They are going into the mix with the governance review that was mentioned today, if you tuned into the audit committee by Tim O'Gara. So the shareholder has also launched a governance review. So our ideas and options, as well as the recommendations coming out of the Grant Thornton report, are going to be blended with the shareholder's own review of governance. And I think the timescales you can see in the Grant Thornton report, but I think Tim's on the call, could comment as well. No later than October, I believe, are the timescales. I don't know if one of the officers wants to comment on that.
We'll take that as a read then, in that case. Thank you. And my final question is going back to one of the first things I said just after Jeff had spoken earlier, about the relationship between audits, committees' responsibility for governance, and, if you like, OSM's responsibility for risk and good practice and generally looking after the council's interests generally. Now, I think, as I read it, the holding company also sort of has a firewall between risk and trading ability. I mean, it seems to me that you're operating in two different fields. And you say in your report, and it's a worthy thing, you say in your report you're looking for two things this year: growth and reducing costs. Most companies would say the same, and that's perfectly fine. But you will understand that both of those bring forward great risk. If you're paring down an organization and yet still trying to grow it in the situation in which all these companies are, which is, pretty lumpy, I'm very concerned that if we do not have the right scrutiny back here at the ranch and the ability to know what you're doing or what's going on, we've had plenty of examples of people ignoring everything and making the wrong decisions. How do you, within the holding company, see your ability to bring those two things together and have a very open understanding of where your risk lies?
Okay, several questions in the question there. I'll have a go. I think you are right in that, and it's not unique to local authorities and their companies. This is a challenge in the private sector as well. When you're trying to grow businesses at the same time as become more efficient, drive costs down, of course, there's inherent risks. And it's really important that you do it in a way that you don't separate the reduction of cost from the growth. In terms of the scrutiny and the oversight of what the companies are doing, and in fact what we're doing as well, and the challenge of a transparency in a democratic environment in regards to commercial companies, that brings its own unique challenges, some challenges which have been brought out most recently in the Grant Thornton report. I think, again, I'd refer you to, I think, the management's response to those actions, which is to recognise that these are real challenges that we need to continue working to ensure that wherever possible, we're as transparent as possible, particularly in this environment with democratic oversight, that wherever possible, we're only trying to protect those aspects which are commercially really sensitive for the businesses, as opposed to everything, you know, that we think is sensitive, and to make sure that there is sufficient visibility of the changes that we are proposing. And clearly we do that in very open partnership with the shareholder and with council officers. So that's from a holding perspective. We've got ideas, we're sharing those ideas with our officer colleagues and with the chief executive and with the shareholder representative. But as I've just said, I think we're at the start of a change program here in terms of how we do things differently. We'll be involved in that. We'll be, as I know my colleagues in the council are as well, really trying to look at how we can improve transparency. Mike.
Yeah, would it be helpful if I came in?
Please.
So just to pick up a number of the prompts that Peter's given me, Chair, and then you might want to see if other members have got additional questions for Peter. So I'm very happy to endorse the job that Bristol Holding have done this year on behalf of the council. And I think if you read the Grant Thornton report, they're very positive also about the role of Bristol Holding. Without Peter and Chris, we simply wouldn't have had the capacity to execute the sale of the company in the very, expeditious way that I think, we have done since the principal decision was made. And whilst clearly members have a range of different views about, when the right time to sell the company was, but in my view, once the decision was made, I think all the evidence is that it's been handled really effectively, in particular by Peter and Chris, but also the others involved in Bristol Holding. And as I say, I think Grant Thornton's report endorses that. What is difficult, as Peter has said a number of times, is the complexity of the overall framework within which Bristol Holding are operating in. And Grant Thornton have made a number of recommendations about that. And as you know, officers have accepted those recommendations and will work through the management actions that flow from that. The other point I wanted to make, Chair, was just to pick up the point about, and I think Councillor Negus is perhaps, expressing some concern about Bristol Holding not having, the ability to do that going forward in terms of this challenge around cost reduction. The shareholders given a really clear steer to Peter and the Holding Co board that we don't want to see that at the expense of the capacity of Holding Co to do its job. So, we have asked Peter and the team to have a look at the whole system of the council's oversight of the companies, not just at Bristol Holding. So Peter and the colleagues who are on the call tonight, are in a joint endeavour to make sure that our overall arrangements in terms of our company oversight is as efficient as possible, that wherever possible, we're only doing things once on behalf of all the companies. And as Peter has said, he's looking to bring some proposals forward for the shareholders to consider. But we're really clear what we don't want to see is a reduction of the capacity of Bristol Holding to do what it's doing for us at the moment, because I think all the evidence is that they're doing that very, very effectively. And as I say, I think that comes through in the Grant Thornton report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you both.
Thank you, Mike. And can I just follow on from what Mike said by repeating what I said at Audit Committee this afternoon, which is that whilst I have lots of issues about a whole variety of things to do with governance in the companies, it's not to do with Bristol Holdings, who I believe brought a great deal of added value to all that's happened in the last year. And I'd say this wasn't being critical of council officers, but I recognise that they did not have the time to do justice to the companies when they were also having to have responsibility for everything else that went on within the authority. And I'm very happy that Bristol Holdings has done that over the last year, relieving officers to do the job that officers should be doing. So I have absolutely no problem with that, but I'll come back to my questions on other things later. But Joe and then Paula.
I am really struggling, and maybe I'm being naive here, but I do wonder really what the point of all of this is. I thought the point of this was to deliver services for Bristol City Council, and it just feels to me that we've gone down a rabbit hole, and we can bang on about Bristol Energy, but that's only one part of it. And we're kind of where we are now, so we have to be here. And so I'm not criticising anyone for the jobs they're doing, but it feels like we spend an awful lot of time focusing on governance issues, and we've employed loads of people to kind of manage these companies in the best way possible, and then I'm asking what the gain is for us to have this type of structure, and it's taken me a few years to kind of come to this, but we just seem I mean, is there an end game here? Is there something? Where is this taking us? And just another comment really is around the sort of issue around commercial sensitivity, that where we have businesses that aren't currently trading with any or doing business with anyone other than the council, why is there such a great need for commercial sensitivity when it causes so many problems? The lack of transparency might well be justified if you were submitting tenders and be responding to tenders and that type of thing, because you would obviously not want your competitors to see what you were doing. But in this situation, it feels to me like there's an awful lot of opacity in the whole process, and that tied in with all the people that have had to come in and sort of probably all earn more than most council officers, and it just sort of worries me that I feel like we've just gone down this rabbit hole. And okay, it's a bit of a general point, but I just feel like we spend an awful lot of our time scrutinising companies that are there to do something to other companies that are there to do something else, and in the end to be honest with you, I just wonder what we'd be doing if we didn't have to do all that.
I think that could be an interesting exam question for students of all sorts of things, Joe. I'm not quite sure who to look at to answer it though. Does anybody want to answer it?
I mean, Chair, I'm not sure there's a direct question to respond to, but I think Councillor Sargent's made a very valid point that at the end of the day, we need to stay focused on delivery of benefits and services to the citizens of Bristol. I mean, later on in this meeting, we're going to come on and I think focus more clearly on the great job that colleagues at Bristol Waste are doing every day to deliver really vital services to the residents of Bristol. And we'll hear some of the exciting plans that Gorham Homes have got to deliver, on really high priorities for Bristol in terms of, delivering additional homes to people who live in the city. So I think if you look at the wider company activity, you can see just what potential the companies have to deliver benefits to the citizens of Bristol. I think because we've begun the meeting by focusing on some of the challenges around Bristol Energy, I guess, Joe, we've kind of ended up focusing on that end of the spectrum, but hopefully during the course of the meeting, Chair, everyone will be able to see that, the companies are delivering really important services that, the city depends on and largely appreciates.
Thank you, Mike. Paula and then Steve.
Well, I suppose I've got, I'll sort of ask a question and pose maybe a solution or ask for something that I think will help the situation. My basic question, I want to ask a question about reserved matters because it seemed very confusing and I had to do a little bit of Googling earlier on today to try to see if I could understand it. And that aligned with the fact that I had read the Grant Thornton report, and the recommendation 11, I think, says that members need training. And I'm listening to what Joe says. So, you know, we're trying to get our grip around TECL companies, non-BGPL companies, the Heat Network company, which is just going to be a company for a short while before it goes into the City Leap company. I feel, you know, much more positive about this than Joe does. I think that the city is changing. Hopefully these things are all going to be better ways of doing things. But equally, I know that, you know, I was in the cross-party Temple Quarter group on Friday and talking about, you know, delivery mechanisms. Things are moving very fast in the city. And I as a member, I'm finding it really quite difficult to catch up. And I think really what we would need, my question is, can we have some sort of a briefing? You're talking about, you know, still not having worked out the governance of Gorham Homes. And I think maybe at that point, when that governance has been sorted, that the holding company, I don't know who it would be who would do it for us, but we could have just, you know, proper sort of wiring diagrams of what types of companies they are, what the benefits are, you know, so that we could do a proper evaluation of it, because it's very hard to keep up with it all. I do sympathise with Joe. And I think that, you know, I'm feeling very aware of my duty of doing it thoroughly. So if I can go back to the question then about the reserved matters, that was in the legal advice. And I think it seems to be about the fact that we are, you know, the Google search that I did seemed to show me, to point me towards the fact that all shareholders unanimously have to vote, and, you know, they have to vote unanimously. And then there's something in the advice about decisions which would normally have been made by the shareholder are now actually coming to cabinet for unanimous, or, well, decisions by cabinet.
Paula,
can I have a bit more detail on that?
Can I just interrupt, Paula, because reserve matters is a potentially big issue, but it's not directly relevant, I think, to the business plan that's in hand. So I'm keen that we don't lose the time to actually ask questions about the business plan.
I thought it was about the decision-making process going forward. Does it not mean that in future everything's going to go to cabinet and things are going to be decided unanimously by cabinet?
No,
it doesn't say that.
Does it not?
It doesn't. And the decision is taken by the designated member, who is currently Craig as the deputy mayor, and that wouldn't change anyway. So I just think I really do want to keep us on the
So folks, so stick my question to, can we have a sort of a full wiring diagram of what the companies look like and the advantages and disadvantages of all the different types of them?
Mike.
So we can certainly do that, and I think the shareholder liaison team, either Claire, well, probably Claire, but with Tim's oversight, can do that. But I was just going to make the suggestion, Jeff, that I think to some respects it's kind of linked to the governance review, which the council is already embarked on, and perhaps in reporting back to OSM on the governance review, that would be an opportunity to go through some of this in a bit more detail at a future date with the committee chair. But in the meantime, I'm sure Claire can fashion something like what Councillor O'Rourke has described.
Yeah, I think that would be really helpful, but also the suggestion we talked in audit committee about new member induction, and it would be really helpful if there was a very simplified diagram that can be there to provide what will be a significant number of new members, the background as well. So that would be helpful if that was possible.
Yes, Chair, we are working on that, particularly as part of the member induction programme, but also more widely to ensure there's that enhanced level of training and company detail amongst members. So I'll take that away.
Thank you, Claire. Stephen.
Thank you, Jeff. My question sort of echoes rather what Joe said, and perhaps Anthony as well. It's about restricted papers and confidential papers, and I mean, I've noticed just in my time, sort of last 3 or 4 years, that there's been an increasing use of restricted papers, and particularly in the case of Bristol Energy, I I formed the strong impression that that was to stop us seeing bad news. And that to me has led to a lack of trust, actually, between the officers and the members about whether it's right that the papers are restricted. And it's led to a problem for us as councillors having information that we think should be in the public domain, but we're not allowed to put it into the public domain. So I'm not particularly talking about today's meeting or the papers we've been presented with today. I'm talking about a more general trend that is quite dangerous, I would say. My question really would be, or rather my comment would be, that it needs to be very carefully thought through before papers are designated as confidential or restricted. I think that needs to be, and I think, Jeff, that you as chair of OSM or some other party needs to be involved in that process. So that's a bit of a rant about confidential papers, but I do feel quite strongly about it. I'm happy for Mike or somebody else to comment.
Mike?
So I would like the opportunity to respond, Chair, because I would say officers feel just as strongly about that and ensure that we meet our statutory duties regarding the protection and the release where appropriate of information. And I can assure Councillor Clark it's given the most careful consideration before any decision is made to make information exempt. It is looked at by senior officers at the council very carefully indeed, and we only do it when we are absolutely satisfied that it meets the requirements of the legislation. And the reason for the increase is because as soon as a council makes a decision to create companies and to put them into a commercial environment, it is inevitable that there'll be information that becomes commercially sensitive and confidential. And in order to protect the council's and therefore council taxpayers' interests, having invested in a company, it's inevitable that some of that information has to be protected. And I think what the Grant Thornton report lays bare is that there are real, challenges in balancing the two competing priorities of transparency and public decision making and the legitimate need to protect the financial interests of the council once it enters into a commercial environment, particularly one as competitive and difficult and volatile as the retail energy market. So, I think it's important that I make those points, Chair.
If I could just respond, Jeff, before Anthony comes in, if that's okay. I mean, some of this actually, Mike, goes back to before your time. I mean, some of it is arising from the arena, for example. There was definitely a number of cases where it was used as a barrier to hide matters that shouldn't have been hidden. But do you also accept, and I understand you've got a strong opinion, that's fine. Do you also accept that that puts us in a difficult position as well as members with two hats on, well, with at least two hats on, sometimes in the case of Jeff with 3 or 4 hats on, so that puts us in a very difficult position. And we haven't really had that discussion about how we as members, as representatives of the public, should deal with that issue, that moral issue, if you like, or certainly an informational issue.
So Chair, I acknowledged in my previous answer that it's a really difficult balancing act to balance the competing needs to ensure as much transparency as possible in public decision making, with also the need to protect the council's commercial interests when it enters into that kind of environment. It is difficult and it's complicated, and the Grant Thornton report acknowledges the difficulties of trying to balance those two things. Chair, I think Nancy might want to add something from her perspective.
Just one more go, Jeff, if that's okay. So would you accept then the idea that Scrutiny had some direct input into that decision making?
The law sets out who the appropriate decision makers are with regards to the release of information. And Tim O'Gara, as our monitoring officer, has set that out in some detail for the audit committee very recently. That's a publicly available report, I think, to the November committee, Nancy.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. Can I just add? I totally agree with what Mike said, that we do go through a very painstaking process when officers identify that there may be information that is exempt What happens is that Tim O'Gara is responsible as the proper officer for deciding whether information is exempt based on statutory and regulations, but also on the public interest test. And I go through that information in detail with officers for each matter and ask them to justify why the information is commercially sensitive. So we go through that assurance process, and then that goes to Tim for a final overview. So it goes through a number of different challenges before it can be designated as an exempt. So there is a lot of assurance that goes on, but ultimately it is the decision of the proper officer, Tim O'Gara.
Steve, if I just come back, because I don't disagree with the sentiments you're expressing, and disclosing the maximum amount of information publicly, I think is really important. But what I would say is things under Mike and Tim O'Gara's control have come on significantly. We did used to have a situation where reports went into confidential almost at the drop of a hat, and we do now have a situation where that is much more rigorously controlled. We can always put forward arguments for doing things differently, and I'm in fairness, the administration and officers are receptive to listening to that. They won't necessarily agree with it, but I do think things have come a long way, and I think there is much less going into confidential now than there was. So I think we have to be careful and judge accordingly. But it's right that we keep on challenging. Anthony, can you be very brief?
A very brief remark on this, and I wanted to get back to the holding company because they come along here to ask questions. Thank you for that, Steve. I've been fighting this battle for many years. In fact, the report you've done, or that's been issued on the Bristol Waste Company, is almost right. The body of the report is there for everyone to see, and that's fine. And it's not been held back completely because bits of it are commercial. That's great. We've got that right. The two latter appendices are absolutely commercial. No question of that at all. So they should be exempt. I understand that. The first one, which is basically the company accounts of Bristol Waste Company, I think is still questionable. And I think there's quite a lot of that, which in the past we might have seen on a good day, and now we're not. I'm going to leave that. Can I move back to the holding company, please? I'm interested to know if the holding company, as represented here today, is happy with their role as being the group that has to take client instructions and make sure that they are delivered in a properly regulated manner by the various companies. Is that not in itself a conflict? Does that make you uncomfortable? It definitely makes me uncomfortable. And in view of the fact that only one councillor, in this case it's Jeff, can be trusted to see the accounts because councillors aren't trusted, that compounds that problem. So how do you feel as the holding company? Are you in the right place in that respect?
So if I've interpreted the question correctly, so the client, if you mean by the client the shareholder, I think if you mean by the client the shareholder and you imply is instructing us, I can absolutely assure you, Councillor and the Awesome, that is not the case. Of course, the role of the legal board of directors is to take into account the shareholders' interests. Our role is to make sure the companies are delivering against the council's objectives, against cabinet approvals, business plans being an example. And it's inherent in our role as legal directors of the board of directors of holding company, and it's the same for my colleagues on the other boards within the group, to stand up and challenge environments where we feel it's not in the best interest of the company or the council. And we do that on a regular basis. I'm pleased to say, and I'm not saying it just because they're on the call, that that's always well received. It's a professional environment. so that we all understand our roles and responsibilities, our boundaries and responsibilities, whether they be council officers, company legal, directors, etc., etc. So, you know, going right back to your first question around roles and responsibilities, holding company, where that all fits in the council, please don't assume that we are simply an execution arm of a shareholder to direct companies. That is not the case. Our role is oversight, scrutiny, assurance back to the council, because like the other companies, we're owned by the council, but we have a strict code of governance. We have legal responsibilities ourselves to operate as legal directors on the boards, and we're scrupulous in how we execute that responsibility, which often leads to a constructive professional challenge between ourselves, officers and colleagues within the shareholder group. So yes, I am.
Anthony,
I'm satisfied with that.
Anthony, yep. I'm going to come in there because I've got a few questions I want to ask, and I realise we also need to move on. But the first part of my question links around this confidentiality and sharing information. Peter, I don't understand why Bristol Holdings accounts haven't been filed at Companies House when they've been circulated to members. And I also don't understand why they were dated the 10th of November when the BE 2020 accounts were dated the 17th of December. And normally holding companies would sign off their accounts at the same date as their subsidiaries. So as far as the starting position is concerned for 1st of April, will there be any more impairment needed before the start of the year we're reporting on? So that's one question. The other question I have looking at this is the question of, and I've said I've seen the benefits of Bristol Holdings, but I'm trying to understand how it's viable. Talk about commercial propositions, but most of the commercial propositions the council's looking at can't afford to pay the costs of the professional advice. And yet, on the other hand, we have City Leap, which is paying out six-figure sums for professional advice, but that's going elsewhere and not paying sums to Bristol Holdings. Now, Gorham does pay money to Bristol Holdings, but Gorham is paying that money out of a loss. At Heat Networks, you're doing due diligence, but I must admit, I thought the due diligence would have been done when Cabinet proposed grant funding and funding those projects 18 months ago. And my final question is that, in the figures, there's no indication of interest on loans from the City Council. Do the loans still go through Bristol Holdings, or do they go direct to the subsidiaries?
Chris,
if I can pick up on a couple of those points, then Councillor Gollop. In terms of the accounts, yeah, you're correct. They were signed off in November. There was a decision taken by the board that they, with the exception of Gorham's that had to be filed, whose accounts had to be filed earlier, that it would the remaining accounts of Bristol Waste, Bristol Energy 2020 and Bristol Holding would be sent for filing together, and we assumed that they would be published on Companies House on the same day. Unfortunately, there are significant delays at Companies House at the moment, and it's meant that there's been a haphazard publication of the accounts, which is why the Bristol BE 2020 accounts have actually been published, but Bristol Holdings hadn't been on the same day, and it's one of those things we're talking about a 2 to 3 week delay at Companies House. So there was no intent in any way. It was just an accident within that. You mentioned about the impact of impairment. Obviously, the accounts were presented as at the position of the end of March 2020, and yes, of course, there is still an asset of in the accounts there of 1.3 million in terms of investments, and yes, that will need to be impaired as part of the 2021 accounts.
Okay, thank you. So then it's my question just about viability is is, I believe in what you're doing, but I don't see how many more people you can charge for what you're doing, and actually making holdings a viable commercial operation.
Well, I think, that is a risk that we've clearly outlined in our risk register. That is a risk we're trying to mitigate. We're trying to find, working with officers, as Mike mentioned, to find solutions going forward on the basis of, at the moment, we're at a pretty, I hope, worst case scenario with only 2 small companies within the group. We need more companies in order to spread, the growth costs. There's no doubt about that. It's common sense. But we're not planning on failure. We are trying to find solutions that are affordable and sustainable to retain the holding company capability, because you've heard the value of that to the council. That is a challenge it's a live challenge that we are working. As I think Councillor Gollop from the shareholder group, one of the areas we hope, and we've covered it in the business plan, is a growth area, is to work with the council and the transformation programme and GNR, Executive Director, and support him in his commercialisation strategy as that evolves, particularly when it comes to consideration of alternative delivery models from a commercial perspective. The work that we're doing at the moment, as I think from the briefing we gave on Bristol Heat Networks, is a bit of a sort of road test for the value that we can bring as a very small commercial team to help the council launch alternative ways of doing business. In this regard, Bristol Heat Networks as an example. But I think it's a very real risk, and that's why we have on a risk register. It's one of our biggest risks in terms of sustainability of the holdco approach if we don't grow the group and we don't enlarge the base.
Okay, thank you, Peter.
Just before I finish, sorry, I just want to go back to something that Councillor O'Rourke mentioned, which I've got great sympathy for, actually. It is a very fast-moving environment. There's loads happening in the city. There's loads happening even within the 2 or 3 companies within the holding group. And it must be incredibly challenging, for councillors and groups such as this to keep track. That has been recognised as well, and I'll just use the example. And in fact, it's Claire's initiative, I think, that we're looking to providing more briefing sessions on particular topics. And just most recently, we did a briefing session for the shareholder group, for example, on Bristol Heat Networks. It's only an hour. It was really productive, and it just helped fill in some of those gaps. And I think with Claire's help, we can go forward working with our partners in the subsidiaries to identify topics which will be of interest and are really material, and provide these sort of hot briefings.
Thank you, Peter. Joe, I'm really desperate to move on, but I see your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, what you're saying is that you need to get more companies to kind of justify the existence of the holding company. And I just wonder, why would we want to get more companies just to keep the holding company going? If that's all it's there for, then what's the point?
I don't think that if I may answer, Chair, I don't think it was just the rationale would be just to support the holding company. There are clear benefits, we would argue, to the council in terms of its potential for commercialisation. The council by law is restricted in its ability to trade. It can only trade through a company, and if you're going to exploit that ability and generate more revenues for the council, then you have to operate through a council. If you look at the heat networks work that we're doing, the council was given a choice. It could either accept a grant of 10.2 million for heat networks and operate through a special purpose vehicle, or it could reject the grant. So it couldn't actually take the grant without operating it through a company. So that's why we set up Bristol Heat Networks, and we're doing all the due diligence and work, and hopefully demonstrating the benefit to the council by realising that there are significant issues and risks that the council didn't appreciate, that we're sort of opening up. So hopefully that will demonstrate that there's a benefit to both parties.
Yeah. Okay, it's just as long as the tail's not wagging the dog, that's the main issue as far as I'm concerned.
No, I think that's a very fair comment, and that, you know, that wasn't intended. It's not about just sustaining holding company by, you know, finding more ways of growing the business. The holding concept was approved by Cabinet, is delivering, you've heard today, it's delivering value for the council. In order to sustain that capability, we need to find ways of sustaining it. It needs the income within the group to be able to pay for that very small team. That's really the principle.
Right, before anybody else comes in, Peter, I'm now going to come on to you to introduce the Gorham Homes business plan, please.
Thank you, Chair. So I would like to introduce very quickly the Gorham business plan. I think since we last met, you know, Steve and the team were literally standing at the same time as ourselves. They've had a really successful, busy year, and they produced this excellent document. I have covered in my commentary the key points. It is an excellent document, and I think, as I've explained in the commentary, and Stephen can expand on this, what is important, I think, for us and colleagues is to realise that this is not a business plan to lay out the proposition for individual developments. Those individual propositions will be properly governed through process that will be considered by Cabinet in due course. What Stephen and the team have set out here is what we've called like a framework business plan, which will be refreshed every year, but it sets that framework within which they will operate. It really is, I think, really good in many ways, but in particular, it particularly addresses
We're not receiving you, Peter.
Can you hear me? I'm not on mute.
Yeah, I can hear you. Must be you, Jeff.
So it particularly covers environmental, social value and innovation topics across all of their projects. They've already launched one partnership. They're en route to launch another partnership for Baltic Wharf. They've already launched a partnership for Romney, and that's coming along really well. It's a really good start for the company, and as explained earlier, it's in a startup mode, which answers the questions earlier about the loans. The final point I would like to make just before passing over to Steve to take questions, and it really picks up on this question earlier in terms of when do you decide or when do you decide what should and shouldn't be public and what should be exempt. We've got a really live example here today, which we can talk about, which is that the business plan, the risk register within the business plan is a snapshot in time, which was submitted weeks ago into a very lengthy council process. Meanwhile, real things happen and things evolve. Following a discussion over the last few weeks, one of the risks in the risk register, it's risk number 2 if you are interested, and it's to do with planning applications, has changed and the risk has increased. Discussed it today with the managing director, had a discussion with council colleagues in terms of some of the detail. It's early days, it's quite immature in terms of outcomes and clarity. So on the basis of the fact that it's work in progress, we haven't got a definitive outcome, and it could relate to an impact on the commercial aspects of the company in their future partnerships. It was decided that that small topic and small update will be provided by Steve in exempt session today, rather in the public sector, in the public forum. I hope that, you know, gives a real explanation of how we look at every topic individually, and we start on the basis of it must be public. Now, why can't it be public? And there are occasionally really good reasons, as I've just explained, that some things are better initially covered in exempt and then ultimately will undoubtedly come out into a public environment if necessary. It's not just arbitrarily, and we at all times work very closely with Tim and Nancy and the team, who are the authority, as we've just heard. I think without any further ado, I think I will now open it up. You've got the business plan in the pack, and we've got the MD, Stephen Baker, and his FD, Chris Arnold, here as well, with a very nice Gorham background, I might say, to take questions and answers. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Steve and Chris, welcome. If I just start the ball rolling, and it may even be, Peter, that these come back to you, but what are the cash flow implications if pipeline 1 or 2 were to be delayed by 6, 12 or 18 months? Mm-hmm. Is the £10 million a subsidy or a repayable loan? Because I see it's a capital item in terms of the council, and I'm just trying to understand what that impact is. And then, and this is just a general question, but who is underwriting the risk of a major adjustment in the housing market? Should that happen? I mean, given no one knows what any market's going to be doing in a week's time, let alone a month's time or 3 years' time, there has to be that potential. So I'd just like some clarification on that.
Thank you, Councillor Gollop. If I can take those questions in reverse order, if I deal with the housing market adjustment first, and then I'll hand over to Chris, our FD, to talk about the capital and the issues that you raised around the expenditure. So in terms of the housing market adjustment risk, the way that Gorham is structured is that the business operates with secondary joint venture limited liability partnerships that sit underneath Gorham Homes. And the reason to do that is to bring the two companies together, and then we own 50-50 of that secondary company. In terms of what would happen in the event of a cataclysmic market failure, the risk is contained within that limited liability partnership. And as set out in the covering paper, as written by the finance team, it allows the council the ability to restrict the amount of borrowing that's placed into the company and give a degree of separation. As you quite rightly point out, it's very difficult for us to forecast what will happen in the housing market. I came to this meeting last year and we forecast what was going to happen in the future 12 months. And as it turned out, there was a global pandemic and the housing market operated in a way that we weren't forecasting. I think, though, we should be positive in the fact that we've got a very dynamic city in Bristol and a very resilient housing market because it's a great place to live. So to be operating in Bristol puts us in a strong position. However, we will never be able to mitigate all risks in the housing market, and we should be alive to those risks and be able to manage those, which we think we are doing through our risk registers and structures of governance that we've got in place as best as we can do. But we must accept that whilst you do any trading, there is an element of risk involved in that. So Chris, if you can come back to Councillor Gollop on the finance questions, please.
Okay, thank you very much. So if I carry on the theme of working backwards, I think your second question was about the cash flow impact of delays around 12 months in the pipeline. There would be some mitigation if the pipeline is delayed, then some professional costs associated to those deal preparation activities would be deferred. So as a ready reckoner, I think somewhere between 0.7 and 0.8 million for a 12-month delay would be a reasonable discussion area. First point you raised was about the loans, and they are all, any money that Gorham takes or any loan made to Gorham bears interest to the council. So the council receipts an interest flow. Does that answer the question? Or?
Yeah, thank you. Okay, does anybody else have any questions or comments on the Gorham business plan? Claire?
Thanks, Jeff. It's sort of a general question, and I don't know whether it should be aimed at the holding company or Gorham Homes, but because I suppose I am extremely cautious now after the Bristol Energy fiasco. I wanted somebody to outline for me that, we've had the Grant Thornton report saying that Cabinet wasn't as well informed as they should be and they didn't have full understanding, etc., etc. I was wondering, now when it comes to Gorham Homes, well, what learning has come out of the energy debacle, and therefore what protections are now in place to make sure that any decision on Gorham Homes is made with absolute understanding of the decisions that Cabinet are making now. So I'm sort of assuming that somebody somewhere has put in a list of learnings and a list of protections to make sure that this doesn't happen again. And I suppose I'm particularly, alarm bells are ringing when you make the covering statement, Stephen, that it's difficult to forecast what will happen in the housing market. That's that lovely coverall, isn't it? Because it was difficult to forecast what was going to happen in the energy market. So yeah, I just want some really clear understanding of how this decision-making process is going to be absolutely watertight. Sorry.
That's okay. If I can give you an example of probably the differences between the two businesses.
I can't hear you now.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Everybody else. Okay, great. So if I can give you just run through how probably the decision making is quite different between Gorham Homes and Bristol Waste and Bristol Energy in that respect, because of the types of work that we're doing. So the decisions that the council makes through the reserved matters process to give us authorisation to acquire land and to commence trading is very singularly large individual decisions. So the council looking at these one at a time, interrogating them and going through them in detail, and then making those decisions as to whether to invest or not. So we're not talking about a high frequency, very small amounts of business activity. We're talking about singular projects that the council are working on rather than individual decisions as to whether to sell a product or not. So we're making this one investment decision, say Romney House, that went through the process, and we look at all the variables, and then there's a conscious decision to invest in that project. We then come on to the next project, and then again there's that process is gone through in the same level of detail. And then each of those business streams, they're like little individual companies, are then followed through and can be monitored by the council, and you can see the performances of each of those business streams. So it's quite different than any of the other businesses that the council are undertaking at the moment. Now, hopefully that's given you a bit of indication as to how we see the process works. But others may want to make some comment to help on the broader.
I'd like to add to that, if I may, Councillor, just at a holdco level as well, and touching actually on the linkage into the shareholder. I think it's perfectly natural, and as I highlighted earlier, it's one of the biggest risks in our risk register, that the reaction by the council, councillors and groups into, as you termed it, the BE fiasco, that's a natural consequence that we have to address in order to retain your confidence and ensure that we're providing a level of assurance, not just to OSM, but to other groups as well, and shareholder. So just another list of examples of things some of which we had already started anyway, because bearing in mind, we came along last year. So things like the risk management framework, this gets mentioned in the Grant Thornton. It's been mentioned before. We've done a lot of work on the risk management framework, working for the companies to help improve risk management, the process, most importantly, an ability to be able to articulate, understand, and communicate the risks effectively to a shareholder and to groups such as OSM, etc. And that work is still work in progress. I wouldn't for a minute say we're there, but it's come a long way, even in the last 12 months. Proper engagement at the board level. We have good engagement at all the board levels, and you could argue, we had good engagement at BE board level, albeit it was only for 3 months prior to everything sort of going over the edge. We likewise with Gorham, your specific question, we have excellent engagement. Chris and I attend as observers on all of the Gorham boards. We're privy to all their papers, and we have very close working relationships with Steve and with Chris and the team. I think, as Steve mentioned, I think it's really important that there isn't an immediate knee-jerk reaction, which is understandable, but would be regrettable, because you have to think about the market environment. As Stephen's explained, it's a very different market, a very different environment than retail energy retail businesses, and it brings with it different time cycles. So we hope we'll have more time in this market to contemplate some of the challenges that Steve and the guys will be managing. I think that the chief executive has already explained that the council has already reacted actually ahead of the Grant Thornton to our concerns and findings from what's been going on with Bristol Energy, has launched its own governance review, of which we'll be supporting. And I'm no doubt, because I know I can say this, that I know how the officers operate. It came out again in Grant Thornton today, explained what an open and very good response they've had in the management plan. I'm in no doubt that colleagues will be addressing improvements really effectively going forward in the governance review to try and work better to make sure we've got better oversight and that we're able to understand the risks and manage those risks in the businesses. So hopefully that gives you, it's not a risk-free environment. It's a fact. This is a commercial business, as was Bristol Energy. It's a very different type of business. It moves at a different rate. And we are learning and building on, as you said quite rightly, the experiences, some of them not very good, coming out of the Bristol Energy experience. I hope that provides some explanation of what they're doing, but I've never aimed to say that everything's perfect. It's work in progress and continuous improvement.
Thank you both. Yeah, I do have confidence in your advice and completely understand that this is a different market. But I suppose I'm not. Yes, it's a different market. I suppose we've got the same cabinet, and I'm not sure what processes or what protections are in place to stop politics fogging the decision-making process, because when it's a business making a decision, you just make a business decision based on the facts and the money. But last time it was very clear that it wasn't just financial decision making, and I'm not sure there was political decision making, and so I'm not sure how we will be protected again from that political decision making, that political fog that sadly has left me with no confidence. So I'll leave it there. It's probably a question that can't be answered, but if anybody cares.
Thank you, Claire. Joe?
Before I start, can I ask anybody who's got their microphone on to turn it off, because it's actually really difficult to hear what other people are saying. I just wanted, I suppose in a way I'm coming from this in a different direction, to Claire, because I am interested in understanding how aspirations for our city are combined with the commercial goals in terms of making money and being efficient. So that one of the things that I think is really important about the Gorham Homes project is to deliver more housing that people in Bristol actually need and can afford, not just what is profitable. And that's which presumably is going to make Gorham Homes, set them apart from normal kind of big housing developers. So I just want to understand how that's done. And the other thing, I was sort of looking at the business plan, there's very, very little mention about aspirations for delivering affordable housing. And I'm not just talking about social housing, I'm talking about any kind of housing that might be in some way affordable to people in Bristol. And whilst I appreciate that's not your only goal, and there are lots of other admirable goals around sustainability and that type of thing, I just feel like it would have been good to see more of that, and so that would allow us to understand how that's being delivered in conjunction with being commercially viable, successful.
Mike.
Thanks, Chair. So when we talk in this forum and elsewhere about the shareholder, we're talking about the mayor and the priorities set by the mayor and the council for our companies. So most of the activity that we're talking about here is about ensuring that via the shareholders representative, which is Councillor Cheney, via the shareholder group, and in turn via Bristol Holding, ensuring that the activities of our trading companies are doing just that, Joe, that they are delivering the strategic priorities of the city as set by, our directly elected mayor. That's what all of this is about. And one of the reasons why this is such, a challenging thing to get absolutely right is that those objectives are not purely commercial. So we have to be very conscious of working in a commercial environment and protecting the financial interests of the council. But as you suggest, Joe, this is also about, delivering the wider benefits to the citizens and businesses of Bristol, which is why a council would set up a company in the first place. So just to reassure you, that's what most of this activity is about, is ensuring that the shareholder, i.e. the mayor's priorities, are actually being delivered by the council's company structure. Those are Peter's marching orders, if you like, to ensure that the strategic objectives of the shareholder are actually being delivered on a day-to-day basis by our companies. So actually it's a good question to ask, Joe, because it's given us the chance just to remind everyone that is the point at the end of the day.
So why isn't that more visible in the plan? Because, like I say, look at all the objectives and all the sort of stuff around, green homes, sustainability, all of that is in there, and sort of, nice, beautiful design and places where people are going to want to live. And you look at the pictures and they look great. But there's still very little very little mention of affordability, and the fact that there are so many people in the city who cannot afford to get on the housing ladder, who cannot get a council home, and we've got a massive waiting list. And I thought that was one of the points of setting up the housing company, was to find another way to deliver housing for those groups, not just for the people that can afford to buy their own home.
So Chair, that's a question Stephen might want to come back on.
Yeah, so what we've actually done in our business plan on page 4 is set out the 3 objectives that have been set by Councillor Cheney as the shareholder. So these are the ones that the council have instructed to us, and we have then structured our business plan around those objectives. The business plan is the opportunity for the council to set out to us what the key objectives are and how they wish us to trade in the coming year. So we've been very clear. We think that we set out in our plan the key objectives that we take forward. In terms of affordability, this is a really difficult challenge for everybody in the city. Bristol, as I said earlier, is a very successful city. It has high house prices to reflect the fact that it is a desirable location to live in, and we are acutely aware of that. However, we have a balance in terms of commercial viability. To maintain our business, we have to make some profit. That is balanced, we feel, quite well by the fact that we're delivering very high levels of affordable housing when compared against other developers. When I say affordable, that is traditional in affordable housing, shared ownership and social rent. The challenge around what happens in that middle area, in between those who can access the housing waiting list and those who have to access the market, is something that is a real challenge for Bristol. We've been speaking with organisations that work in that space, and in the coming years it's something that we would be happy to look at. But it is a real challenge to try and reduce down the sale prices and also maintain financial viability in a commercial model. So where you're delivering these mixed developments and trying to make a commercial return, really it's always going to be a balance between traditional affordable housing, sub-market homes and open market to try and get that right. We won't always get that balance right, but we are certainly, I think, in the right space and trying as hard as we can.
But I would like to see that more explicit. I really would, and maybe that's a comment to Craig rather than to yourselves. But you know, it should be part of the goals, the objectives of our, you know, of Gorham Homes, to look for ways to increase opportunities for people to get their own home, whether that's to rent their own home on a long-term tenancy, or to buy their own home, whether it's shared or outright. And I just think that, you know, that ought to be sitting there in the objectives. So maybe that's for Craig, not for you guys.
Joe, can I just say I've noted your comment, because I think that's something that all members saw is the reason behind Gorham. So I certainly will be suggesting that we put that in our comments to Cabinet. So thank you for that. Members, I'm thinking that we bring this section on Gorham to a conclusion. Members happy with that? Stephen, Chris, thank you for your time. You are very welcome to stay with us, but we would understand if you took this as an opportunity to take your leave. But thank you both very much. Members, do you want a very brief break, or are you happy that we continue? Everybody looks happy to continue. Okay, we will continue, but acknowledge that members may leave their seat for a couple of minutes if needs be, and I hope that Peter and Bristol Waste won't take that personally. Peter, can we hand over to you to introduce Tony and the team?
Yeah, I'll be delighted to introduce the Bristol Waste team. I'll just cover, if I may, a quick introduction. And we're particularly grateful that their chair, Tom Spall, can join us this evening as well. So we've got Tom, Tony and Adam, who will be delighted to take your questions. I'll just set the scene. We all know and love our company, Bristol Waste, and the team, who are doing an amazing job under really, really difficult circumstances. I commented to Tony the other day, well, probably a few weeks ago now, on a Sunday morning, very early, very dark, very cold. And there they were, the Bristol Waste guys with a smile on their face collecting waste when the rest of us were trying to get home and keep warm. They've been doing an amazing job under very difficult circumstances. And I'd just like to say that outright. In terms of a business plan, we've specifically worked with Bristol Waste under the guidance from Denise and the council to focus on 21-22 whilst providing an outlook on the remaining years. So this business plan is particularly going to go to Cabinet for approval around 21-22 with a view and in terms of the out-year forecast for the remaining years. It does build on the excellent work they've been doing, but they've been under incredible pressure, unplanned activities, principally as a result of COVID, the impact on staff, costs through the roof. We're bringing in staff to cover staff sickness. The recyclate prices globally, not just here in Bristol, have really changed significantly, well beyond any expectations of waste companies, and that's had a big impact. The impact on the commercial growth opportunities for Bristol Waste, because going back to a question earlier, we don't have any companies in the group that only deal with tasking from the council. They're all working out in the commercial sector as well. Bristol Waste is no different, although it's a smaller piece of work at the moment. And obviously with the impact of COVID, a lot of those businesses, if not all of them they've been targeting, have had to close their doors. So all of that growth opportunity disappeared as well, almost overnight. And lastly, population growth, and Tony can expand on this as necessary, and the impact that that's had on their costs and their business plan as well. Despite that, and they have covered it in the business plan because we specifically asked them to bring it out because it's often not recognised, they have been driving through significant efficiencies and improvement programs, and they will continue to do that to try and help meet, reduction of costs and increase of effectiveness. I think, as I've just mentioned, this business plan does illuminate the real challenges. Coming back to the theme earlier, I think it's a very transparent business plan. There's nothing under any bush hidden away here. It's all there for everyone to see. It's very transparent, very open about the challenges, but it's also an optimistic business plan. And I think that's largely driven by the leadership on this call, and we're here to support them. And lastly, so in theory, in 21-22, as you'll see in the financial figures, most importantly, they are still forecasting a small surplus in the TECL and the non-TECL business. But as I've said, from 22, 23 onwards, that becomes incredibly challenging and things need to change. And I think if you read a couple of reports in the attachments to the Cabinet report, there's a couple of excellent reports by the client and by the finance team in the council. And I think they really clearly articulate that these problems around the operating costs for Hartcliffe, around Recyclate, etc., are recognised, and it's a partnership approach to how we can help position the company in years 2 outwards, even though we're not here to address that in this particular business plan. So they have got some significant challenges. They're addressing those challenges on a day-to-day basis. Going forward, they've got challenges beyond year 1. Those are recognised by the client and by the council, and there's a commitment to work on those challenges before we're back here in a year's time with the next business plan. I'm going to leave it there because I think it's important you get time now to ask questions of the team here this evening.
Anthony.
Thanks, Jeff. Yes, I also would like to applaud the fact that this is a very open report. It's nice to feel trusted, and I'm sure the public feel that way too, that this is an honest report about the problems ahead and suggestions as to how it might be remedied, not all of which are, perhaps as confident as others, but at least we've got them in front of us. There were a couple of things that struck me as in terms of, first of all, questions, and I think we can do all of this without going into exempt. I was staggered to see the figure for the figures for the Hartcliffe Recycling Centre. What this is going to, how this is going to work. Can you define what you think the value will be after, after the costs and the benefits of all that will be? Because it's got 0.9 million quid down here. Now that's going to be a lot of that's going to be establishment costs and various other things. Can you take us through that a bit? And while you're there, there's also something called the Hartcliffe Professional Services, which I perhaps didn't drill down far enough, but I couldn't figure out. So could you take those two together?
Yeah, thanks for that, Jeff. I'll start with the services. We're supporting BCC to build Hartcliffe, and the services are for a project manager, and it's the cost of the project manager to support it. That's where that comes from.
Right.
The cost of running Hartcliffe is not just the labour costs and the vehicles and the equipment, it's also, there's an element there of disposal costs as well. So as Bristol grows and it increases, then obviously there's more waste produced. So where we could say some of the waste may be diverted from the other two sites, Days Road and Avonmouth, there is still an increase in waste. So it has to be disposed of. And some of the costs there, the 900K, is including disposal costs as well as labour. So it's a breakdown.
Let me ask a really dumb question then. Are you actually saying that the Hartcliffe Recycling Centre is going to cost Bristol City Council 0.9 million quid on an annual basis?
Well, that does include disposal costs as well. So those disposal costs would occur anywhere in Bristol. If they stick to the two existing reuse and recycle centres, you'd still be paying those disposal costs. But people would be going across town to use the recycle centres.
Okay.
And we'd still be paying that apart from the vehicles travelling.
Right. So perhaps it's not a figure that should really be attached particularly to that one site, but should be seen as a component of a wider picture.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, that's fine. The second question is, I do appreciate the burning need for Bristol Waste Company, sorry, there's no pun intended, the need for Bristol Waste Company to branch out into the commercial field. I was here at the beginning of Bristol Waste Company, and that was the first thing we saw as a wonderful thing that we could get on and do and make 20% profit that way, 20% off the profit that way. But in 7 years, or perhaps even 8 years of establishment, by your figures, it's only at present achieving 5.5% of its sales figures through its commercial operations. This, in view of the fact that it was always felt that that was something we should get into, why after 7 years have we only got that far?
I think over the last couple of years, we've really focused on the development of the company. There was a lot to do with the normal running of the company, changing the vehicles. We had to do a lot with health and safety. We had to do a lot with training. That's been really our focus over the last couple of years. We're now at the point where we can start developing it. And obviously COVID came along, which put us back a little bit. But I think we've really got the base now of a fantastic team, a good management team, and the real opportunity to grow the business over the next few years. So it has been quiet, but the focus has been on getting the day job right, which is what we've been doing over the last couple of years.
Can I just extend that a little bit? In view of the fact that we're in agreement on this, why is it doesn't seem from the very limited projection in this report that we're seeing a great growth of that commercial arm, but surely you would agree that it's something that is absolutely crucial in terms of sustaining Bristol Waste Company in a profitable, or at least just about breaking even way, is to get more into commercial.
Yes, and that's the whole intention, is to look at the commercial. But you know, our priority over the last 2 years has been to ensure that the job that we do for the city is done safely and correctly, which we're at a point now where we believe that's the case, and we can start to grow commercially. So the percentages are always seen as quite low, but I'm sure there'd be arguments on the other side if we are suddenly forecasting large percentages from the municipal work that we do. Our percentages have always been low because we reinvest back into the business, or it's fed back to the council. So I don't think there'll ever be the opportunity there, or there shouldn't ever be, where we're making large percentages against a municipal contract.
Sure, but clearly you're seeing FM as being one of the big ways forward in this respect. Would that explain why we've had this rather controversial secondment or 2Ping of present BCC workers, or am I not allowed to?
I think Nancy might drop in there.
Can I just say that's not something that we should be discussing in open session?
Sorry, I thought I was probably within bounds on that one. Okay, I'll leave it. One final point. 2 or 3 years ago, we had quite a bit of a ding dong, I remember, in Osham with the Bristol Waste Company and social value. And we felt that this was something which would be very strong with Bristol Waste Company. We wanted it to be so. I couldn't see anything in your report about social value. And I wondered if you were able to say something about it now.
Yeah, the social value, we actually use a matrix that is supplied by the council, and the social value is about 26 million back to Bristol.
Sorry,
Right.
Tony.
Is that in the report?
Yes, Councillor Negus, it's in the report. It doesn't jump out. It's in the KPI
I'm so sorry,
table.
I missed it, and I was actually looking for it too.
It's a very good point. It doesn't actually jump out. I think last year it was 24.3.
Okay.
It's projected to just go over 27.
You've answered my question. Thank you very much.
Right, who else? In which case, if I while you're all thinking, if I just couple of comments, and one certainly just following on Anthony's, the social value issue. We always had a battle with Bristol Energy, who kept showing us social value to turn their performance around. But in Bristol Waste case, I think the issue is still there. The social value is massive, and we'd like to see that emphasised much more because of its contribution to the local community. So that was one point. My questions, however, then revolve around the nature of the contract, Tony, because normally in a contractor-client relationship, the contractor quotes and the client chooses which contractor they're going to use. In this situation, it's a little bit different, isn't it? And the council specifies the value of the contract. And I'm just wondering, from the point of view of the company, where you're having to design the service to fit the envelope offered, are there things you believe you could improve recycling levels significantly for spending some additional sums? In other words, do we examine the possibility of increasing the value of the contract in order to enable you to provide more than you're currently able to do?
There is, we're working very closely with the client team on ways that we can improve recycling. That will be talked about later, so it's not in our plan. There are other things that we can do. We talk about Avonmouth. Those are the things that we're looking at, where we're putting in a separate sorting line. We're breaking down the waste that goes into Avonmouth we're doing it at the moment, but we'll do it even more when the phase 2 comes in. But everything that we can do where we break the waste down, it's more of a product to us than waste. If we can break the waste down and we energy to waste, so we burn it, or very, very little now goes to landfill. If we break the waste down, those percentages are dropping quite dramatically, and everything that we pull out of the waste that we work through and separate and pick through goes off and is sold as recyclate. So there is a lot that we can do. There is a lot that we are doing, and there's more that we can do to improve the figures and improve the recyclate. Yes, we're working with the client team, and I think over the next sort of 3 to 6 months, we can put a paper that you can see, and you'll see the detail of what we're trying to do. But there are always ways.
Because I asked that in the context that if you were a department within the council, one of the questions you'd probably be being asked through the budget process is there spend to save projects that could contribute? And I think it would be wrong of us not to ask that question just because you're in a separate company structure. But if we know that's coming, then that's positive.
And Avonmouth really is a spend to save. When we look at Avonmouth 2, the investment into Avonmouth 2, it's an investment into the site which reduces the risk of the baler breakdown. It's something that's a single point of failure within the business. That will cover that risk, and it will always also generate an income when we set up Avonmouth 2. So it is a spend to save.
Yeah. So I may have said this to you before, Tony, but one of the advantages or disadvantages of lockdown is sitting at home, looking out of a window. Once a week, I see your teams actually working and collecting the rubbish in a way I wouldn't normally have done. And I have to say their work rates are extraordinary. And the way they keep going at the pace they do is something that's remarkable. I think there are issues not for discussion here, but potentially in terms of service and communication issues where councillors could be more supportive of what you're doing if we collectively know more of what you're doing. And I know that through shareholder group, but other members don't necessarily know all the detail of what's going on. So that would be one issue that I think could be thought through in the future. But you do talk in your business plan about the impact of COVID, and clearly that's significant as far as you're concerned. What I'm not quite clear is that the council's compensated for the effect of COVID from the government. And I'm presuming that funding effectively will come through to you in the contract, and that the council isn't keeping the funding and not sharing it with you. Can you just...
I'll pick up the first part and then Adam will pick up the second. You're right. During this year, the teams have worked exceptionally hard, but with people being at home a lot more, the volumes have gone up exponentially, and they have worked extremely hard to clear the streets as well as they have done. So going on to the councillors, we do have quite a few conversations with the councillors, and the ones that I deal with are very supportive. So, you know, when we talk to them, when they have issues within Bristol, we find the relationship with the councillors is very, very good.
Thank you.
Adam, did you want to just talk through?
Yeah, thank you, Tony. So, Chair, I think that the 2 points on the COVID funding, one relates to this financial year, where central government provided extra funding. We're clearly tracking our COVID costs and the impact on the business plan. We talk about it in there. We're forecasting an outturn of sort of just under 1.6 million of extra cost or drop in income impact on the business. That will be reviewed at the end of the financial year in line with the payment calculation. And I understand that the council have got a provision in the accounts of 1.7 million for that. In relation to this business plan, so next financial year, there's no expectation of any extra funding from BCC, and the impact on recycler volumes and values has been forecast. Similarly for waste volumes and a specific spike provision for labour. So it has been modelled into the plan.
Right. Okay, thank you. Any other questions, Brenda?
Thank you, Chair. It's not a question, it's just a comment to say that I thought how useful the reuse centre at Avonmouth is, and that I hope we can have more of those, because that's a really good way of demonstrating to people that you don't have to throw everything away. A lot of it can be reused. If you no longer want it, it's helpful for somebody else. And just also a thank you for clearing up lots of the fly tipping I keep reporting. Thank you.
Thank you on both of those. And the new centre at Hartcliffe will have a reuse centre in it as well, to match the Avonmouth one.
Okay, any other questions or comments in public session? Joe, can I ask you if there's any way you can ask your private session question in a coded way that doesn't have to be done in private?
I'm not sure. I don't think so, because it's the same. It's on the same subject as Anthony's. That's already been told that he can't ask that question. So it's.
Okay,
I think it is restricted. Unfortunately, I think it is an exempt.
Okay, can I just ask for clarification from Lucy a minute, because I think that is coming to us in February. Lucy, is that right?
That's correct, Chair, yeah.
So yeah, sorry, Lucy, carry on.
Just perhaps Councillor Sargent, we could pick up a question in the interim period offline, and then you could have your report at your next meeting.
Yeah, the only reason I'm asking is that it is in the report, and therefore we should be querying it, because it's part of it is, you know, what we want to talk about is part of this report.
So Joe, if I can tell you, I was concerned about that and felt that it was important that Osm should see the business plan. The business plan isn't in a position that it's going to Cabinet tomorrow, and therefore it's coming to our meeting on 15th of it's coming to a February meeting. I'm not sure which
24th, I think it is.
24th of February. So it's coming to a February meeting so that we will see it before it goes to Cabinet.
You mean the day before it goes to Cabinet?
Yeah.
Which, to be honest with you, I'm not happy about at all. Because how are we supposed to really get anybody to take any notice of our concerns if it's going to Cabinet the next day? I mean, to me, that's ridiculous. I recognise that quite a lot of the stuff we see, it maybe isn't quite so much of an issue. But this, to me, is a really, really important issue, which we should be looking at now, rather than in the day before it goes to Cabinet and gets decided. And I would say that I feel very strongly about this, and I feel very concerned.
So I understand that, Joe, and I share your concern, but the fact is that we are not allowed to see the paper until 5 days before the Cabinet meeting. So Scrutiny is not in a position to do anything other than either not look at it or look at it the day before the Cabinet meeting. So
yeah, but we already have some information, so surely we should be able to be talking about that.
I'm looking for guidance from other members or from officers on how we proceed on this one, because I'm not sure how we resolve it.
I think, Councillor Gollop, isn't the decision as to whether or not you go into an exempt session today to discuss the appendix that's actually there? I think that's what Councillor Sargent is asking for.
But I don't think we have enough information in the exempt appendix to fully discuss it, is I think the challenge. And Anthony?
If it helps, and I'm sure it doesn't, I've got a question which isn't this one, which I'm quite sure will be exempt. So if you are minded to go into an exempt session, that may help, Joe.
Yeah, no, I'm very happy to go into exempt session, because clearly I don't want a situation where we're not discussing something that's of concern to members. Paula, are you wanting to ask something in public session, or are you wanting to
No,
ask
I was
something?
just going to say something about information, but if we're going to go into exempt session, it doesn't matter.
Okay, we will shortly go into the exempt session. However, whilst we are still in public session, Tony and Adam, if you would just, very welcome to keep listening, but I've made notes with regard to the items that we've discussed so far in terms of our submission to Cabinet tomorrow. I think it's only right that we should just agree if we are going to say anything and what we're going to say in public for the public discussion. Are members happy that that's what we should do? Yeah. Okay. So I'm just trying to read my own handwriting, and I was starting off with the general comment that concern was expressed about the budget and business plans and a number of other decisions all being taken at the same Cabinet meeting, which meant that it was difficult to actually do justice to the very significant budget and business plan issues. I think that was a view expressed by members. I then went on to Bristol Holdings, and my brief notes, I know disagree with Anthony's comments, but I suggested that we started off by noting the contribution of Bristol Holdings in a difficult year and how important that was. I think that we should note that members raised concerns about the viability of Bristol Holdings business plan and how it is dependent upon Gorham Homes, which is loss making for part of its income, and concern about whether the council's commercial operations would have the ability to fund Bristol Holdings as substantially as would be needed. And I think that we should then also note members expressed concern about governance and noted the Grant Thornton report. That was my suggestion on Bristol Holding. Does anybody have anything to add or that they wish to challenge in that? Anthony?
I'd simply like you to be a little bit firmer about the last point. I do think that we really do need to get to grips with this. It is the elephant in the room, and we've got to address it. So I think that needs to be fairly strong.
Okay, I will draft that slightly stronger. Okay, and then on Gorham Homes, picking up Joe's point, I think we felt that we recognised the importance of new homes. We felt there was little mention of affordability of homes. We commented about the ability to deliver the pipeline and to keep the company viable, how critical that pipeline was. And how critical the impact of significant adjustments in the housing market would be. Those were the main points that I picked out of what we raised at that stage. Anything else members want to add or withdraw? Okay. And not because you're still there, Tony, but I didn't really find anything critical to pick out on Bristol Waste. So I'm sure my colleagues will prompt me in the course of the next session. But members, on those two items that I've done so far, are you happy that with Lucy tomorrow morning we work that up into a statement to go to Cabinet? And Lucy, I'm hoping you've got some good notes of that, so I don't have to struggle to read it again tomorrow.
I do, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Right. In that case, before we go into exempt session, I have a number of other items on the agenda, which I don't propose taking today. And that is the Mayor's Forward Plan, minutes from WECA, which were for information, WECA Committee Forward Plan, which was for information, and our work programme, which members need to note has changed significantly because of additional meetings required as a result of additional cabinet meetings. I don't propose taking those at this meeting. Is everybody happy with that? Okay, in which case, go to item 9 on the agenda, exclusion of press and public. That under section 100A4 of the Local Government Act 1972, the public be excluded from the meeting for the exempt items of the business plans on the grounds that they involve the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraph 3 of part 1 of schedule 12A of the Act. That means that I now close this public meeting, and Democratic Services will email us a further Zoom link to join in the new meeting. Is that the right understanding, Lucy?
That's correct, Chair, yeah.
Okay, so we just log out now and receive an email instantly. Yep. I will hopefully see you all very shortly.